and you don't want to raise your voice, not a problem. You can type it in the chat function. There's a little speech bubble at the top of your Teams window. If you just click on that, it'll open a chat down the right-hand side of the page. And so if you've got any problems or questions, you can pop them in there. So today's lesson, what we're going to focus on is sentence types, because one of the things that we've mentioned when we've had a look through the mark scheme for the writing exams is the use of complex sentences. So it kind of helps if we all know what a complex sentence is and how that compares to other sentence types, of which we are looking at 3. So in this session, what we're going to do is I'm going to identify and explain what a simple sentence is. I'm going to explain what a compound sentence is. And then finally, I'm going to tell you what a complex sentence is. And then, as with a lot of the PowerPoints, all of these lessons that I put together, there are some questions on the end of there, should you want to test your own skills. And again, I will share this with you after today's live lesson so that you can access the slides and have a look through them in your own time at your own speed. So, if we're ready, simple sentences. That's the one that we're going to start with. Now, we're starting with a simple sentence because they're essentially the building blocks that we use to make both compound and complex sentences. So we need to be sure that we understand what a simple sentence is, first of all. So, a simple sentence. A simple sentence has one independent clause. It shares one idea. It's almost like one thought, one idea that we're writing down, and we start it with a capital letter and we end it with some form of end of sentence punctuation. So a full stop, a question mark, or an exclamation mark, any of those that have the dot in them. And it's just one idea, one statement. That's it. Now, when I look to find definitions of these, a lot of them include some other terms that then we need to explain. So if we have a look on the screen here, it says a simple sentence has a subject and a predicate. So I thought, you know what? I'm not going to assume that anybody knows what all these things are. I'm going to explain every part of this as we go along. So it says that these simple sentences have a subject. The subject is the person or the object that we are talking about. It's the focus of the sentence. So if we're talking about a fella, if we're talking about a lady, if we're talking about children, in some cases we could even be talking about animals, we could be talking about groups of people. It's whoever is the focus of the sentence. That's all we mean by subject. And then we need to think about the predicate. Predicate, a lot of these English terms have, I consider them to be either fancy or complex names for something that's in reality quite straightforward. So if we have the subject, so the focus of our sentence, they need to do something. And that is basically what a predicate is. So in this case, we've got a sentence here, the dog ran fast. The dog is who we are talking about, so that's the subject. And the predicate is what they're doing. So the dog ran fast is a simple sentence where the dog is the subject and ran fast is what they did. That is the predicate. And in this case, I've used an example of the fastest dog that I know. This is my dog, Missy. I'll show you a couple of other examples. So like I say, the subject isn't always a person or an animal. I'll show you some more examples. She is happy. 3 words. Starts with a capital letter, ends with a full stop. She is happy. She, whoever the person is that we're talking about, that's the subject. So that's the person we're focusing on. The predicate, what is she doing? She is happy. She is in a state of happiness. So when we look at these 2 examples, you can see I've highlighted, well, I've sort of put it in bold, what the subject is. And then we've got the predicate at the end, which is she is happy. I'll just show you one more example. So a slightly longer example. My best friend lives next door. The person, the subject, the focus of the sentence is my best friend. What they are doing, so the predicate is they are living next door. So that's basically how we break down a simple sentence into its two main constituent parts. We've got the person or the object, the focus of the sentence, and what they are doing. So they're called the subject and the predicate, but somebody is doing something. That's a simple sentence. And grammatically, it should make sense on its own. A person is doing a thing. An animal is doing a thing. That's it. So that's all that that's basically sort of how I can break down the sort of more complex technical language of, subjects and predicates. When we actually look at it, we all know that if we are expressing ourselves in writing, we are usually writing about a person doing a thing. Even if it's ourselves, we are the subject of the sentence. So a simple sentence is just made up of those 2 points, and it usually expresses one idea. My best friend lives next door. It's one complete thought that can stand on its own and make sense grammatically. As I say, my favourite example is always going to be the dog ran fast. Now, if I show you some other examples of simple sentences, because if you look at these, I've started the examples with some very short ones. So that first sentence, I ran, is only 2 words, but it's as much of a simple sentence as the last example. We went to the park after school, which is 7 words. They are both simple sentences, because if we look at each one, I, subject, ran, predicate. The dog, subject, barked, predicate. She, subject, reads every night, predicate. So you can see all of these have got an example, and the more you practice these things, the more you're able to identify them. So a short sentence doesn't always mean it's simple, same as a long sentence doesn't always mean it's one of the other varieties. It's a case of as long as it just has one subject doing one activity, it is a simple sentence. That's it. After that, we start to build them up, and they get that ever so slightly bit more complicated. So once we have quite a good understanding of a simple sentence, then we can move on to compound sentences. Now, if we think about the meaning of that word just as its own, without context, a compound is a mixture, right? A compound is some things that are mixed together, and that's exactly how it works with compound sentences. A compound sentence is essentially 2 simple sentences joined together, and they're usually joined together with what's called a conjunction or a semicolon. So it's 2 ideas that are 2 simple sentences. A person did a thing, and then another simple sentence, a person did a thing, but we're joining them together. So we're either going to use a word to join them together, which is called a conjunction, or we're going to use a semicolon. Either of those are acceptable. Now, the conjunction, the word that we put between the sentences to join them together, I have a list. Here we go. Here are some of the most common ones that we see. I mean, I think the most common one is probably the word and. I walked to the shop. One simple sentence. And I bought a chocolate bar. We could have that as 2 separate standalone sentences, or we use the word and to join them together in the middle. Now, depending on what we're trying to express, depends on what conjunction we would use. And a conjunction, think of it, it's a junction, it's a meeting of 2 places. I always think of it as like glue. It glues the 2 simple sentences together. So you can either use one of these words, or you can use a semicolon. Either are acceptable. You may find that certain ones are more applicable in certain situations. So now it says here fanboys. This is an acronym for ways to remember what some of these conjunctions are. If you look down the side of this, it's very similar to what we were talking about with things like mnemonics yesterday and memory techniques. Fanboys stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. So it's if you use all these words on a regular basis anyway, but should you need to sort of remember them in list form, we use an acronym in order to try and help with that. So it says here that a compound sentence has two independent clauses. If something's independent, it stands on its own. I would replace the words independent clauses here with simple sentences, because that's all they are. That's the same thing. An independent clause is basically, like we said with simple sentences, it's an idea, a thought, an expression that stands alone on its, with just, in fact, here we go. An independent clause, a group of words that stand alone as a complete sentence, usually containing a subject, we know that, a verb, a doing word. So that's what we were looking at as being the predicate. And it expresses a complete thought. This means that the clause, the bit that we're writing, doesn't depend on anything else. And that will make sense when we move on to the complex sentences, where we have independent and dependent clauses. So far, it's basically we've got simple sentences. Compound sentences are two simple glued together, either with a conjunction, one of those words, or with a semicolon. And again, depending on what you're trying to express, depends which one of those you're using. So, some examples. I wanted to play outside. If I said that on its own, it's a simple sentence and it's fine. If I said it was raining, that's fine. That's a simple sentence. In this case, the word it replaces the sky or the weather or. In this case, we've chosen to use the word but. I wanted to play outside, but it was raining. She finished her homework and she watched TV. So again, we've got two simple ones glued together with the word and. We can walk to school or we can ride the bus. Again, simple sentence, we can walk to school, we can ride the bus. We're using the word or to show that there's a choice between them. He studied for the test. So again, we've got the person, he. Studying is the action that they're doing, it's the predicate. And then the last part, so he felt prepared. Same thing. He is the subject and felt prepared is the predicate. So all of these are really nice examples of compound sentences. And all of these are using those conjunctions, those joining words. If you want to see how they look with semicolons, so I've just highlighted them here. It says, I like reading. I am the subject, reading, or liking, I should say, is the predicate, that's the action. My sister prefers drawing. So in this case, the semicolon is acting as a replacement maybe for the word but. I like reading, but my sister prefers drawing. The movie was long, but we enjoyed it anyway. Or the movie was long, and you just pause. If you're reading out loud and you come across a semicolon, then you just take it's like a comma. You can see it's got a comma in it. You just take half a beat. It's a pause. The movie was long, we enjoyed it anyway. So each one of these, if you look at the two parts of the sentences, they are simple, they make sense. The only difference is these are two glued together to make a compound. Obviously, the hardest one is the one that I'm going to show you last, because this has slightly, I think if you understand some of those basic concepts of just having like one idea expressed, when we start adding detail, then we're just expressing bits of sentences. And they do work and they do make sense, but only if we have a full sentence with it. Let me show you this. So what is a complex sentence? It has one independent clause. So a phrase, a statement, the dog ran fast. I lived next door to my best friend. You know, all those that we saw earlier. One independent clause. But to make it a complex sentence, it needs to have one or more dependent. So if an independent clause is something that is fine on its own, it makes sense, it's grammatical, it's great. And a dependent clause, it depends on that first sentence. So it won't make sense on its own. Now, if I show you a couple of examples here, I stayed inside. So that in itself is an independent clause. That makes sense. I stayed inside. I, the subject, stayed is the predicate. I stayed inside because it was raining. So you could say I stayed inside. In fact, I think if I look at that one, I stayed inside because it was raining. So we are only staying inside because of the further information that we've been given. It was raining. If we look at the second one, when the bell rang, the students lined up. Now, in this case, it's the other way round. Where it says the students lined up, that makes sense on its own. That is an independent clause. That is a simple sentence. The students lined up. The students are the subject, and lining up is what they are doing. It is the predicate. When the bell rang, if I just say those 4 words on their own, they are not grammatically correct. They need the rest of the sentence in order for it to make sense. If I said when the bell rang, what? You're waiting for some more information, because on its own, those 4 words do not make a complete sentence. They are dependent on the rest of the sentence. I always think about dependent clauses as being like added detail. They don't necessarily change the meaning of what we're saying, but they may add something that is very important to the sentence as a whole. So if we look at this third example, although he was tired, on its own, that's not grammatically, it does not make sense. It is dependent on this. He finished his work. We say he finished his work as a sentence, grammatically perfect. It is a lovely, simple sentence. We have he, the subject, finished his work is the predicate, the bit that follows it. So we know that this person finished their work, but we've added extra detail and we've done it beforehand. So we've said, although he was tired, he finished his work. So if we said, although he was tired on its own, doesn't make sense. We need to know that final full sentence in order for that beginning to be grammatically. It's okay. It's almost like I always think of it as like ingredients. Certain ingredients, you need to have them all together for them to work properly, but I wouldn't necessarily eat some of them on their own. With these sentences, they are correct if it's a simple sentence, an independent clause, but sometimes they're better with a bit of garnish, with a bit of gherkin on top, with a bit of sauce, and it's adding that extra detail to it. If we look at the last example on this one, we will go outside. So in this case, we will go outside is a simple sentence. It is an independent clause. It makes sense. If we said, if the weather improves, on its own, it doesn't make sense. It needs to have the first part of that sentence. So you can see sometimes the independent clause comes first and the dependent comes second. And sometimes it's the other way around and we have the dependent before the independent. So a lot of this, once you actually start breaking down these building blocks of the sentence, you're not expected for the level 1 and the level 2 exams to be able to identify all these individual parts of a sentence. What you're expected to do is be able to show that you are able to write complex sentences. And therefore, you need to know exactly what is a complex sentence. So then I have to tell you how to, what all these building blocks mean in order for you to have a clear understanding of what it is. So we have, if I show you some, in fact, I said I was going to put some quizzes on the end of here, some questions for you to have a go at. So you can, in your own time, I'm not going to ask you to respond to this, but if you wanted to, you are more than welcome to have a go at some of these examples. So things like the dog slept on the couch. I wanted to go swimming, but it was too cold. And then the final, because it was late, we went home. So what I'm looking at is there a part of the sentence that has the subject and the predicate, and that's it? If so, it's simple. Does it have potentially two statements that are joined together? Or is it one statement with some added detail? And that added detail doesn't make sense on its own. So I would say for this first one, the dog, so the subject here is, it's always going to be the dog with my examples, slept on the couch. That's our predicate. That's a simple sentence. One person did one activity. The next one, I is the subject, wanted to go swimming. That's the predicate. So that in itself is a simple sentence. But it was too cold. So it meaning the weather, the environment, the temperature. That's the subject. Was too cold. That's the predicate. So we've got two simple sentences joined together. So that example is a compound. And then if we have a look at the last one, because it was late, we went home. So we went home is a simple sentence. It's independent. It makes sense. Because it was late, we need further information for that to be grammatically correct. Because it was late, we went home. So they're giving the reason why they went home. So I would say that that last one, they're actually in order of the way that we've gone through them. The first one is simple. The second is compound. The third is complex. Again, the next sort of activity that I put on here, come up with your own examples. Have a think about, one simple sentence. The easiest ones are where we talk about ourselves. I like dogs. He walked to the shop. They spoke Spanish. A simple sentence is usually one personal thing with one action. If we're doing a compound sentence, okay, so take the simple sentence that you've written, do another one, and then choose, are you going to join them together with one of those conjunction words? Or are you going to use a semicolon? Which is the most appropriate for your sentence? And then the last one, write a complex sentence. And that's the one that you'll be tested on in your exam. What they want you to do, and I will show you the mark scheme as always. It's not a huge amount of information they put on there. What they want to see is that you are able to write complex sentences. It's basically showing that you understand the sort of higher level of how we can express ourselves and put things together. Rather than if we did everything in simple sentences, it would sound very simple. It seems to come across almost like childlike, like a limited vocabulary. Today, in fact, even the word today wouldn't change the meaning of the sentence. How was your day? My day was good. I went to work. I worked all day. I worked on spreadsheets. I answered emails. I answered phone calls. I had a class. These are all simple sentences. And when we use them on their own, they sound very, very like unemotive. It doesn't sound very human. It doesn't sound very sort of personal either. More likely, and I've noticed when I go back and look at videos of myself speaking, I will often use, it's very rarely simple sentences, unless I'm teaching simple sentences. In fact, you'll see, I don't use simple sentences unless I'm teaching simple sentences. That's a compound. Because I made one statement, I made another statement, and I joined them together with a word in the middle. When we're writing in our exams, let me show you what it says on the mark scheme. Just share my screen. Like I say, it is only, oh, where's it gone? It's only a very small Where is it? There we go. It's only worth 2 marks per question that you answer. And bearing in mind, there are 2 questions, so it's worth a total of 4 marks on your paper. And if it's just something where you can start writing your email, your letter, whatever it is you've been asked to write, if you are able to just write it and get those ideas out of your head to answer the question, great. What I would do is when you go back to check, so you write your first piece, then you go to question 2 and you write the second one, then you go back. It's the best exam technique I could recommend. Go back to question 1, read what you have written very slowly, and then think, can I change any of these to be slightly higher level? Can I use them? Can I show them as complex sentences? In this case, at level 2, the exam board would like to see at least 2. And demarcated just means capital letters at the beginning, punctuation at the end. You know, it's a clear, they can identify it as a complex sentence clearly. So if you are able to add 2 of those, so you say, let's say you're being asked to write a complaint about the airport. I know that one's come up quite recently. Then I would say something like, because of the delays, I was unable to attend my meeting in Paris. We've got because of the delays is our dependent clause, because on its own it doesn't make sense. And then we have our independent clause, I wasn't able to make my meeting in Paris. So you can have a look, and it's part of this sort of proofreading, checking, editing skills, and saying, okay, I've checked my spelling and, you know, I've made a few corrections here and there, or spaced things out, or, oh, I've forgotten to put my headline in, I'll do that now. You should have time in the 1 hour and 10 minutes that you're given for this exam to spend half an hour writing on the first piece, half an hour writing on the second piece, 5 minutes checking the first, 5 minutes checking the second. And that should take you right up to the very end of your time. If you're anything like me, you will always find one of the questions easier to write than the other as well. So that usually means you may have a little bit more time to work on what you consider the more difficult of the 2 questions. So as you can see on this mark scheme, it says you are expected to write at least 2 complex sentences. It doesn't mention simple sentences. It doesn't mention compound. As I said, in order for me to explain what complex sentences are, you need to have a better understanding of the 2 other forms of sentences. You can see it also mentions on here that any paragraphs. So whenever you're changing subject, you drop it down, you start a new paragraph. Again, it's all about sort of these good writing habits that you would use, especially in either academia or in the world of work. Functional skills English is aimed at English that we use in everyday settings, in everyday life, in everyday work. Whether you are a teacher, whether you are a manager, whether you are writing reports, whether these are all skills that we can use across the various sort of job spectrum. So let me just stop sharing that one. See if I can come up with. I just popped back my presentation. Sorry if your screen's all bouncing around. I just take you up to the end here. So we looked at the 3 examples. We have a little bit of practice, should you want to. And then I sort of tried to break it down a little bit. So I wrote this, it's meant to be sort of two columns. So on the left-hand side, it tells you those 3 types of sentence. And in the right-hand column, it tells you what they're made of, what the building blocks are. So a simple sentence is one independent. It is independent. It is on its own and it works. One independent clause. A compound has 2. It has 1 and 1 and they are glued together. And a complex has 1 independent clause plus some other information, which is your dependent clause. This is your added detail. You can also use things like brackets. You use brackets or parentheses. You can also sort of add extra detail into sentences as well. And if you would like, I am more than happy to share with you. I've got some worksheets. So as well as working through the Century platform, if you are more of a hands-on, get a pen in your hand, you know, you like to print things off and have a go, I have some physical paper worksheets that I can email over to you as well. So just to reiterate, we have our simple sentences. One person doing one thing. And it doesn't have to be strictly a person, remember? Can be a dog, can just be one person. We don't necessarily have to use their name. We can just use a pronoun instead. Pronoun is to replace repeating somebody's name. We can give them a title. It doesn't have to be John did this, Janine did this. It doesn't have to be somebody's name. Usually the subject in a sentence is the person, the animal, the group of people that are doing the action itself, the predicate. So we've got our simple sentences. We have compound, so it's just two simple sentences glued together. And if I just keep up that list, so what I was saying about the most common coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating just means in this case, they're ones that sort of go the best. They're the most popular. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And we usually, I try to put these little hints and tips as we go along. If you are using one of those, we tend to put a comma before them. It's just a little break. Again, it's what I was saying about when you are verbally expressing a semicolon. It's the same thing as a comma. We just take a break. Like if I was using, say, commas in a list, I had bacon, egg, sausage, tomato, beans, mushroom. There's a little break between each word. The same thing goes. We have that little break before we use one of these words. So again, we've got those examples of how to use them in the sentences and then how to use them if we're having semicolons instead. And then the complex sentences as well. So we have one main idea with some added detail that is dependent. That added information, that detail on its own is grammatically not good. It needs to be with that basic, simple sentence, that independent clause. They need to be together or they just don't work. So that's my sort of overview of those three sentence types. And most importantly, why it's important for you to know this. As I say, you probably use them on a very regular basis. You just maybe don't know the terminology for all those parts of the sentence and what makes them different. As long as when it comes to your writing exams, you have a good idea of all of these little things, all of those little 1 and 2 marks. If you're aware of all of these things, then you have a very, very good chance of being able to score highly on the writing exams. So it's one of the reasons why earlier in the week we covered how to lay out the different types that we're expected to write. So like letters with addresses, things like that, that gets you a couple of points. How to work out things like spelling techniques, that can get you up to 3 marks per text that you write. Why should you know about complex sentences? It can all add up and it changes it from being something that is just a draft or something that is quickly written into showing the exam board that you have considered all of these different aspects and that you are able to demonstrate that you know how to use them. So, simple sentences, compound sentences, and complex sentences. As always, I will share these slides with you by email straight after the class. And if I just stop recording,